Hello John, this time I'd like to have your views on transport, which is a problem, especially for those living in rural areas. Tell me, what do you think are satisfactory services provided by Bus Éireann, Imrod Éireann, Dart Lewis? Are they satisfactory?
Yes, well, thank you very much. Bus Éireann, for example, operate a service throughout from Dublin throughout different parts of the country to Cavan from Bus Éireann and to Galway and to Cork and to Westwood, more or less all over the country operate a bus service. Generally speaking, for example, to Cavan it's every hour, and then to towns in between like Navan and Kells, in some cases it can be every half hour, because to augment the people that's perhaps living in Dunshaughlin and what have you. And in some ways the same with the bus service that operates towards the west through Mullingar and so on and so forth. So that's Bus Éireann. So Bus Éireann, with the service that they operate, what has been the experience of people and that are using that service? What are the experience of people in the towns that have to wait for the bus in those towns and villages that they might pass through? Bearing in mind there's a lot of towns and villages that don't have a bus service because of the cutbacks that have occurred there and the demise in some cases of the independent bus and transport operators that heretofore operated and give a service to connect to these rural towns and villages, but alas they were dumbed out of it by the practices of the Bus Éireann at the time by undercutting them. Now, I just mentioned bus shelters for the travelling public. In some places there are bus shelters which are most welcome, mostly of a glass nature, which of course can be vandalised. Navan has one when you arrive from Dublin, going further afield. There's two bus shelters there, but then if you're going to Dublin from Navan, well, there's no bus shelter there where you board the bus. If you board a bus in Kells, there's a bus, if you board a bus there going to Dublin or Navan from Kells, there's a bus shelter there, but there's none on the other side if you're going from Kells perhaps to Cavan or even further afield. So the absence of bus shelters for the travelling public from rural Ireland or from other parts where they have to wait for a bus is bad. In Northern Ireland, the 6 counties where they have a service for buses called Ulster Bus, even in rural roads where buses might only come perhaps every 2 or 3 hours, there are bus shelters where the bus might stop, concrete affairs, so they won't be easily vandalised, and they're all over the place. So passengers are well catered for as regards bus shelters there, where in our jurisdiction in the Irish Republic they're not well catered for. That's number one.
I have noticed in some of these bus shelters where a glass panel has been broken, it's been removed but never replaced, and I'm still waiting for a replacement on the bus in Kells.
Correct.
What is wrong with maintenance?
Well, you see, glass shelters by their nature are liable to be vandalised, and they are vandalised. We've only, anyone that lives in the Irish Republic often sees the vandalism all over the place. One, if there's new trees planted, oftentimes you'll see them broken by vandals and various other antisocial activities of the vandals. You'll see all sorts of damage done. So bus shelters by their nature in the Irish Republic by glass is going to be prone to that. Now, it probably is not cost effective to be replacing them all the time unless they're completely vandalised altogether. But it's the fact of the glass shelters appears to me to be a very peculiar shelter to make for people when they make the opposite in the north of Ireland, in the 6 counties where they're of a concrete nature. So common sense would dictate that this is the way to go, to have shelters that are vandal proof, but are a forced shelter for the travelling public.
This raises another question. I notice in Dublin there are kind of signs which tell you train is going to come along in 5 minutes time, 4 minutes time. You know how long you've got to wait. But in some of these smaller rural towns, you can get at a bus station, and if the bus doesn't turn up at the time you think it is, you get the feeling it may have been cancelled, you don't know if it's running late, and it causes all kinds of anxieties.
It does.
We need more information.
Correct. You need more information, and in the light of the experience that the bus Éireann, which was formerly known as CIE, course Umper Éireann for short, but they're all changed now, so it's bus Éireann for the buses. I presume the buses in Dublin, I don't know whether that's called a bus Dublin or what, but we'll say it's bus Éireann for the sake of argument. There's two things about the buses also. Heretofore, if you weren't familiar with the area where you were going, a bus conductor, which they used to have, but then a bus driver would be a great source of information to sort of say, well, do you know where so-and-so is, can you let me off here or there or yonder? Now, in bus Éireann, at the present time, oftentimes there are drivers from different countries whose command of English is just zero practically. But even if it's of a basic nature, their knowledge of the area or the country which they're driving this bus is more or less zero. They don't know any place, so you might as well ask a passerby, and hopefully the passerby will be an Irish citizen that might know where the area is.
But this raises a question of health and safety. If the bus timetable is not scheduled, say, relatively effectively or efficiently, you could be hanging around, especially at night, waiting for a connection, perhaps in a sheltered area or an unsheltered area, but you never kind of know where you can sit down in comfort and feel safe. How do you feel about security in these situations?
Well, that is a problem, because people, for example, that travel to different parts of the country, particularly say down south and what have you, that might have to get a further connection. And if they travel after a certain time, in some cases 8 o'clock, sometimes 9 o'clock at night, the waiting rooms where there might be a bit of heat and security, what have you, are closed. And oftentimes then, particularly in winter months, people, young and old, and people that might have perhaps health problems. Because after all, if we're in a drafty place where it's cold, and even though we're healthy, we're liable to pick up something. There's also the factor that in some of these stations, bus stations, so on and so forth, if they're closed, or if the facilities that would be open during the day, there are a lot of people about that seem to suffer from drug addiction, alcohol problems, and oftentimes passengers are approached for money and various other things, and a passenger at the travelling public, the bona fide travelling public, don't feel safe because there's a lack of security, a lack of concern for the travelling public, who after all are using the facilities and expect to be able to travel in safety. These are factors that a company like Bus Éireann want to address, which they appeared not to have addressed. There is a problem of security at those places that are closed after a certain hour, and sometimes as early as say 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night, when people are travelling further afield, say in Limerick or any other station where they might have this problem. And don't forget, there is no Gardaí about, so you're at the mercy of all these people with social problems, anti-social problems, and God knows what. So safety should be fundamental in that area, and these problems should be addressed by the transport company as a matter of urgency and not just swept under the carpet.
Do you think there is a subtle use of language here, in the sense that if we were passengers, we just get what we're given, whereas if we were customers, they might be more concerned about our needs?
Well, you see, this is it. Obviously, if you're travelling, you're a passenger, but what way does the organisation treat you? Do they treat you as a customer or a passenger, or what, or a combination of both? Now, we also know when we're travelling on the buses, or especially on the buses, and the trains probably for that matter, but on the buses in any event, that there should be rules that would have to be obeyed. For example, music should not be allowed to be played by either the bus company, which happened to me recently. I couldn't even think with the noise coming from their system that was coming through their intercom system, wherever it is, and there was music and there was news that I didn't want to hear whatsoever. I mentioned it to the bus driver when I was getting off, that the noise was difficult it was a nuisance. So also the use of mobile phones on buses, it's prevented according to the sign that you can see, but not obeyed.
So you think the behaviour of passengers leaves much to be desired?
Well, especially passengers that have come to this country from overseas, that seem to think that as soon as they get in the bus they can have a conversation in their own language, quite loud, and interfering with everybody else, and perhaps going on for an hour, 2 hours, or depending on the distance that you're going, and apparently without a break on a phone and blabbering away in this foreign language, when they're supposed to only use it for an emergency or for somebody perhaps to meet them, end their story.
Would you say this is an age generation problem, when it tends to be young people rather than elderly people?
Well, it's certainly not elderly people, so it's young people, but not aware. Young people, young Irish people, use their phones, their mobile phones, or iPads, or whatever it is that they have, to kind of play games, and it generally doesn't interfere with anyone, except that they don't talk to anyone. They're using these items. Conversation going out the window with them. They don't look at any of the scenery passing by. They might as well be at home in their own room. But I'm talking more or less about the people that have come from other jurisdictions. Some Irish people also, don't forget, do abuse the system. But there should be rules. The travelling public shouldn't have to be subjected to this noise. So
do we need something like a code of conduct?
Well, I think, and to be enforced, and not to be just sort of there and not enforced. So that would be what I'd say about travelling on bus air.
Well, thank you very much for the interview, John. Enjoyed it very much.
And I hope my contribution would sort of help bus air to sort of perhaps mend our ways.